The deafening roar of the Gulfstream G650 engines violently interrupted the string quartet, playing softly on the manicured lawns of the Kensington estate. Tristan Cole froze at the altar, his bespoke Tom Ford suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket as he watched the sleek, matte black private jet touch down on the property's private airstrip. He had mailed the wedding invitation to his ex-wife, Maya, as a cruel, petty joke, expecting her to either ignore it or arrive in a rented compact car, humiliated by her own poverty. Instead, the cabin door slowly descended. Maya stepped out, radiant and dripping in understated diamonds, flanked by a towering billionaire and holding the hands of two beautiful toddlers with Tristan's unmistakable hazel eyes. 3 years earlier, the ink on their divorce papers had barely dried before Tristan Cole was photographed, leaving a Michelin-starred restaurant in Manhattan with Vanessa Kensington. Maya had been standing in the middle of their cramped, drafty apartment in Bushwick, staring at the photograph on a cracked smartphone screen. At the time, she was working 2 jobs, one as a barista, the other as a freelance graphic designer, trying desperately to get her own branding agency off the ground. Tristan, a junior investment banker with an insatiable appetite for the upper echelon of society, had simply grown tired of the struggle. He told Maya that her dreams were a liability, her income a dead weight, and her presence an anchor dragging him away from his destiny. He didn't just leave her, he discarded her. The divorce was swift, brutal, and entirely in Tristan's favor, legally speaking. He made sure to protect his future earnings, leaving Maya with a meager settlement that barely covered 3 months of rent. What Tristan didn't know, and what Maya discovered a mere 48 hours after the judge finalized their separation, was that she was pregnant. Not just with 1 child, but with twins. Pride, anger, and a fierce, protective instinct had forced Maya into silence. She refused to use the children as a bargaining chip to trap a man who had looked at her with such profound disgust. She packed up her meager belongings, changed her phone number, and disappeared from Tristan's world. Now, 3 years later, an envelope arrived. It was thick, cream-colored, and heavy with the arrogance of old money. Maya sat at the massive marble kitchen island of her Tribeca penthouse, turning the envelope over in her manicured hands. The gold-embossed lettering gleamed under the ambient pendant lighting. It was addressed to an old P.O. box she had maintained for her earliest freelance clients, forwarded automatically to her new corporate office, and then brought up by her assistant. She slid a silver letter opener through the seal. Vanessa Kensington and Tristan Cole cordially invite you to celebrate their union. A small, handwritten note on heavy cardstock slipped out from behind the formal invitation. Maya picked it up, her dark eyes scanning the looping, pretentious cursive. Maya, Tristan told me so much about your humble beginnings together. We believe in forgiveness and moving forward. We would love for you to attend and see how wonderfully things have turned out for us. Please don't worry about a gift. We know things must still be tight for you. Best, Vanessa. A soft, low chuckle rumbled from the doorway. Maya looked up to see Alexander Harrington leaning against the doorframe, a cup of black coffee in his hand. Lex, as the financial world knew him, was a titan in venture capitalism. He was also the man who had seen the brilliance in Maya's fledgling branding agency 2.5 years ago, injecting it with the capital it needed to become the most sought-after design firm on the East Coast. Their relationship had started strictly as business. Lex was drawn to her razor-sharp intellect, her unrelenting drive, and the fierce grace with which she navigated the cutthroat world of New York business while heavily pregnant. Over late-night strategy sessions and countless board meetings, admiration had blossomed into a profound, unshakable love. 6 months ago, Lex had placed a flawless 4-carat emerald-cut diamond on her left hand. "Let me guess," Lex said, walking over and placing a kiss on the top of Maya's head. "An audit? A lawsuit? A rival firm trying to poach your lead designer?" "Worse," Maya said, her lips curling into a wicked smile. She handed him the invitation and the handwritten note. A pity invite. Lex's eyes scanned the heavy paper. His jaw tightened momentarily as he read Vanessa's condescending words, but then his blue eyes met Maya's, sparkling with dangerous amusement. He knew everything about Tristan. He knew about the nights Maya had spent crying over her laptop, terrified of how she would feed 2 infants. He knew the grit it took for her to build an empire from the ashes of a broken marriage. Tristan Cole, Lex murmured, tossing the invitation onto the marble counter. The idiot who threw away a diamond to pick up a rhinestone. The wedding is in the Hamptons, the Kensington estate. They think I'm still living in Bushwick, clipping coupons and mourning the loss of a man who wouldn't cross the street to save my life, Maya said, her voice entirely devoid of bitterness. It was replaced by something much colder, much more resolute. Are you going to RSVP? Lex asked, leaning his weight against the counter. Maya looked past Lex, her gaze drifting toward the sprawling living room. Sitting on the plush, custom-made rug were 2 toddlers, Harrison and Harper. They had Maya's beautiful, rich brown skin and her tight, bouncy curls, but their faces, the sharp jawlines, the distinct shape of their noses, and those piercing hazel eyes were a carbon copy of the man who had abandoned their mother. I wasn't going to, Maya admitted softly, watching Harper clumsily stack wooden blocks. I was going to throw it in the trash where it belongs. But Vanessa's note, it's not just an invitation, Lex. It's an ambush. She wants to parade me around in front of her high society friends as the tragic, destitute ex-wife. She wants to use my perceived failure as the ultimate accessory to her victory. Lex stepped closer, wrapping his arms around Maya's waist and pulling her against his chest. So, we give them a show. Maya looked up at him, a spark igniting in her chest. We? You didn't think I'd let you walk into a den of vipers alone, did you? Lex smiled, the kind of smile that made Wall Street executives break into cold sweats. Besides, I think it's time Tristan met his children. He needs to know exactly what he walked away from. And Vanessa needs to learn that you don't send a pity invite to a queen. Maya took a deep breath, the scent of Lex's sandalwood cologne grounding her. The invitation says no children allowed. Good thing we don't follow Vanessa Kensington's rules, Lex replied. I'll make the arrangements. What are you going to wear? Something that will make them choke on their champagne, Maya whispered. For the next 3 weeks, Maya did not give Tristan or Vanessa a second thought. She was too busy closing a multi-million-dollar rebranding deal for a European luxury car manufacturer. But as the wedding weekend approached, a quiet electric tension began to build in the penthouse. Lex had taken over the logistics. The Kensington estate was notoriously difficult to access, situated on a sprawling, secluded peninsula in the Hamptons. Guests were expected to drive out, navigating the atrocious summer traffic, before being shuttled from a designated parking area to the main grounds. We are not sitting in traffic on the Long Island Expressway for 3 hours, Lex had declared one evening, tapping away on his iPad. And we certainly aren't taking a shuttle bus. Lex, how else are we supposed to get there? Maya asked, looking up from her design proofs. I called Howard Kensington, Lex said, casually, referencing Vanessa's billionaire father. I told him I was in the area this weekend and needed a place to land the jet. He practically tripped over himself offering his private airstrip. He thinks I'm coming to discuss the merger his firm has been begging my capital group to fund. Maya stared at him, her mouth slightly open. You didn't tell him you were coming to his daughter's wedding? I told him I might pop by the reception to pay my respects, Lex smirked. He has no idea you're my fiancé. Tristan and Vanessa certainly don't know. The airstrip is right on the edge of the estate, walking distance to the ceremony. The morning of the wedding, Maya stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her dressing room. She had chosen her outfit meticulously. It wasn't flashy or desperate. It was an Alexander McQueen masterpiece, a sleek, tailored, ivory silk suit that fit her like a second skin. It defied the unspoken rule of wearing white to a wedding, but it did so with such commanding, architectural authority that no one could accuse her of trying to look like a bride. She looked like a CEO. She looked untouchable. Her dark hair was pulled back into a flawless, severe bun, drawing attention to the razor-sharp angles of her face and the subtle, breathtaking sparkle of her diamond drop earrings. The door opened, and Lex walked in, holding a squirming toddler in each arm. Lex was devastatingly handsome in a charcoal grey Brioni suit, completely at ease with the fact that Harper was tugging on his silk tie. "Ready?" Lex asked, his eyes sweeping over Maya. He stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. "God, you are terrifyingly beautiful." Maya smiled, walking over and pressing a kiss to his jaw before smoothing Harper's hair. The twins were dressed impeccably. Harrison wore a miniature linen suit that matched Lex's, while Harper was in a delicate, sage-green tulle dress. "I'm nervous," Maya admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. It was the first time she had voiced the feeling. "Not because I care about him, but because he's their father. What if he tries to claim them? What if seeing him breaks something inside me?" Lex gently set the twins down, letting them waddle toward the mountain of shoeboxes in the corner. He took Maya's hands, his thumbs rubbing soothing circles over her knuckles. "He gave up his rights the day he forced you to sign that predatory divorce agreement. He has zero legal standing, and even if he tried, I have the best legal team on the eastern seaboard on speed dial," Lex said firmly. "As for you are not the woman he left in Bushwick. You are Maya Hastings. You built an empire from scratch. You raised 2 beautiful children. He didn't break you then, and he can't break you now." Maya nodded, the knot in her chest loosening. "Let's go ruin a wedding." The drive to Teterboro Airport was swift, taken in the quiet luxury of Lex's armored Maybach. When they pulled up to the tarmac, the matte black Gulfstream G650 was waiting, its engines already humming a low, powerful tune. As they boarded, Maya looked out at the oval window, watching the New York skyline shrink as they ascended. She remembered the day Tristan left. She remembered the suffocating panic, the terrifying realization that her bank account was overdrawn, and the desperate tears she had cried into a cheap pillow. She had thought her life was over. She had thought she was nothing without him. She looked across the spacious, leather-clad cabin. Lex was sitting with Harrison on his lap, showing the toddler how to buckle the heavy silver seatbelt, laughing as Harrison tried to bite the metal clasp. Harper was asleep on a plush cashmere blanket nearby. Maya leaned back against the headrest, a profound sense of peace washing over her. She wasn't going to this wedding to win Tristan back, or even to seek revenge in the traditional sense. She was going to show up as a ghost from his past, entirely resurrected and thriving, to hold a mirror up to his colossal mistake. "We're beginning our descent," the pilot's voice crackled through the cabin speakers. "Weather in the Hamptons is clear, 72 degrees. We should be on the ground at the Kensington estate in approximately 10 minutes. "Right on time," Lex noted, checking his platinum Patek Philippe watch. "The ceremony is scheduled to start in 5 minutes. We'll be arriving just as they exchange vows." Maya's heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She smoothed down the lapels of her McQueen suit. Below them, the sprawling green lawns of the Kensington estate came into view. From the air, Maya could see the massive white tent erected for the reception, the rows of white chairs facing an altar completely covered in cascading white orchids, and the tiny figures of Manhattan's elite taking their seats. She could almost feel Vanessa's smugness radiating from the ground. Vanessa, who had likely spent the morning boasting to her bridesmaids about her grand gesture of inviting the poor ex-wife. Vanessa, who was about to marry a man whose past was hurtling toward him at 500 miles per hour. The jet banked sharply, lining up with the private runway that bordered the manicured gardens, the landing gear deployed with a heavy thud. "Showtime," Lex said, unbuckling his seatbelt and extending a hand to Maya. As the wheels touched the tarmac with a screech of burning rubber, the sound echoed across the estate, silencing the string quartet and turning the heads of 300 wealthy guests. And at the altar, Tristan Cole turned his head, entirely unaware that his carefully constructed, fraudulent life was about to be blown apart by the jet engines roaring across the lawn. The sheer acoustic violence of the Gulf Stream G650ER, touching down on the private tarmac, completely obliterated the delicate, sweeping notes of Pachelbel's cannon in D. On the sprawling back lawn of the Kensington estate, overlooking the glittering waters of Georgica Pond, 300 of New York's most elite socialites, hedge fund managers, and political figures instinctively ducked. Philip Treacy fascinators were nearly blown away, and the meticulously arranged rows of imported white peonies shuddered violently in the jet's powerful slipstream. At the altar, standing beneath a cascading canopy of white orchids, Tristan Cole felt his stomach drop. His perfectly styled hair was whipped into a frenzy. Beside him, Vanessa Kensington was clutching her custom Vera Wang gown, her face flushed with a mixture of shock and rapidly boiling fury as her cathedral-length veil wrapped itself entirely around her face. "What is the meaning of this?" Vanessa shrieked, batting the Chantilly lace away from her eyes. She turned toward her father in the front row. "Daddy, who is ruining my wedding?" Howard Kensington, a silver-haired titan of corporate real estate whose net worth hovered comfortably in the $3 billion range, stood up. He smoothed his morning coat, his face completely devoid of the anger his daughter was projecting. Instead, there was a look of breathless anticipation. "Calm down, Vanessa," Howard barked over the dying whine of the jet engines. He turned to the crowd, raising his hands pacifyingly. "Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse the interruption. I authorized this landing. It appears an extremely important associate of mine has arrived." Tristan swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. He smoothed the lapels of his Tom Ford tuxedo, desperate to look like he belonged in this world of private aviation and impromptu interruptions. He had spent the last 3 years erasing every trace of the struggling, debt-ridden boy from Ohio, erasing the cramped Brooklyn apartment, erasing the wife who had loved him when he was nothing. He was Tristan Cole, future partner at Kensington Holdings. He just had to smile and play the part. The matte black jet taxied to a halt a mere 200 yards from the edge of the seated guests. The sleek, predatory design of the aircraft, completely devoid of identifying tail numbers, save for a subtle, charcoal grey monogram of an H, commanded absolute silence from the crowd. The cabin door hissed and began to lower, transforming into a staircase illuminated by soft LED lighting. 2 men in sharp, dark suits descended first, Lex's personal security detail. They stepped onto the manicured grass, their eyes scanning the crowd with professional indifference before taking up positions at the base of the stairs. Then Alexander Harrington stepped out into the Hamptons' sunlight. A collective, synchronized gasp rippled through the rows of gilded Chiavari chairs. Lex was a phantom in high society. His face graced the cover of the Wall Street Journal and Forbes, but he famously despised social events. He was ruthless, brilliant, and possessed a fortune that made Howard Kensington look like a middle-class regional bank manager. "Good God," muttered a senator in the third row. "Is that Harrington?" Howard Kensington's chest puffed out. He turned to his furious daughter and bewildered future son-in-law. "That, Vanessa, is the man who is going to fund our European expansion. I suggest you smile." Lex stood at the top of the stairs, looking devastatingly sharp in his Brioni suit. But he didn't descend. Instead, he turned back toward the cabin and extended his hand. Tristan watched, his brow furrowing. He expected a fellow billionaire, a supermodel, or perhaps a foreign dignitary to emerge. A manicured hand, adorned with a 4-carat emerald-cut diamond that caught the sun like a beacon, rested in Lex's palm. And then Maya stepped into the frame. Tristan's breath entirely left his lungs. His heart executed a painful, stuttering halt against his ribs. No. His mind scrambled, rejecting the optical input. That's impossible. But it was her. The woman standing at the top of the stairs was undeniably Maya, but she possessed an aura so lethal, so refined, that Tristan barely recognized her. The ivory silk of her Alexander McQueen suit clung to her curves with architectural perfection. Her dark, flawless skin glowed against the stark white fabric. She looked down at the sprawling, opulent wedding with an expression of mild, detached amusement, as if she were inspecting a mildly interesting ant farm. Vanessa, having finally wrangled her veil, squinted against the sun. "Who is that? Why is she wearing white to my wedding?" Tristan couldn't speak. His mouth opened, but only a raspy, pathetic sound escaped. He felt the blood drain from his face, pooling in his expensive Italian loafers. The woman he had discarded like trash, the woman he assumed was still struggling to pay off a maxed-out Visa card, was standing at the right hand of one of the most powerful men in the Western Hemisphere. But the nightmare was only just beginning for Tristan Cole. Maya didn't walk down the stairs immediately. She turned back to the cabin, and Lex reached inside. When he turned back around, he was carrying a toddler, dressed in a miniature linen suit. Lex set the boy gently on his feet, on the top step. Then Maya reached in and guided a little girl, a vision in sage green tulle, to stand beside her brother. Maya took the little boy's hand. Lex took the little girl's hand. Together, the four of them began their descent. The walk from the tarmac to the edge of the ceremony felt like a slow-motion execution to Tristan. As Maya drew closer, the whispers among the elite guests grew frantic. They didn't know who she was, but they knew what power looked like. Maya moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a woman who owned every room she walked into. She didn't look at the crowd. Her dark, calculating eyes were locked dead onto Tristan. When they reached the edge of the seating area, Howard Kensington rushed forward, completely abandoning the decorum of his only daughter's wedding. "Mr. Harrington," Howard beamed, extending a trembling, eager hand. "What an absolute honor. I must say, when you called, I didn't dare hope you'd actually grace the ceremony." Lex stopped, towering over the older billionaire. He offered a polite, entirely glacial smile and shook Howard's hand. "Howard, thank you for the use of the runway. The airspace over Teterboro was terribly congested this morning." Of course. Anything you need," Howard fawned, his eyes darting to Maya. "And who is this stunning vision?" Lex's smile warmed infinitesimally as he looked at Maya. "Howard, allow me to introduce my fiancée, Maya Hastings, the founder and CEO of Hastings Vanguard." A murmur of recognition swept through the nearest guests. Hastings Vanguard was the branding agency that had just single-handedly resurrected a dying Swiss watchmaker and orchestrated the most talked-about tech IPO launch of the decade. "A pleasure, Miss Hastings," Howard said, bowing his head slightly. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Kensington," Maya replied. Her voice was smooth, rich, and entirely steady. It was the voice of a woman who negotiated 8-figure contracts before breakfast. She looked past Howard, her gaze resting on the altar. "Your estate is beautiful. And the bride? Well, it certainly is a day to remember." Vanessa, unable to contain her self-righteous fury any longer, hiked up the skirt of her Vera Wang gown and stomped down the white carpeted aisle, leaving Tristan frozen at the altar. "Daddy, what is going on?" Vanessa hissed, stopping a few feet from Lex and Maya. Her eyes raked over Maya's ivory suit, her face twisting in pure aristocratic outrage. "You are interrupting my ceremony, and you." She pointed a French manicured finger at Maya. "You have a lot of nerve wearing white to my wedding." Maya didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, a patronizing smile touching the corner of her lips. "Vanessa, it's lovely to finally meet you in person. Thank you so much for the invitation. And the handwritten note. It was a very touching gesture. I simply couldn't miss the opportunity to see how wonderfully things have turned out for you." Vanessa froze. Her manicured finger slowly lowered. The name clicked. The handwritten note clicked. The color rapidly drained from her heavily contoured face as she stared at the breathtakingly wealthy, powerful woman standing in front of her. "Maya?" Vanessa whispered, her voice cracking. Tristan finally found his legs. He stumbled down the aisle, his face a mask of absolute terror. "Maya, what are you doing here?" Maya shifted her gaze to her ex-husband. The last time she had looked into his eyes, he had been packing a suitcase, telling her that she was suffocating his potential. Now, he looked like a cornered animal. "Tristan," Maya said, her tone conversational, as if bumping into an old acquaintance at a coffee shop. "You invited me. I'm just practicing the forgiveness and moving forward that your lovely bride suggested." Tristan's eyes darted frantically to Lex. "Mr. Harrington, I don't understand." "It's quite simple, Cole," Lex interjected, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the dangerous weight of an apex predator. "Maya and I are engaged. When she received your rather presumptuous invitation, we decided it would be rude not to pay our respects to the man who was foolish enough to let her go." Tristan swayed slightly. He looked down, desperately trying to formulate a sentence that would save his carefully constructed lie of a life in front of his billionaire father-in-law. That was when his eyes locked onto the two toddlers standing quietly between Lex and Maya. Harrison and Harper were staring up at the strange man in the tuxedo. Tristan looked at Harrison's sharp jawline, the exact slope of his nose, and the piercing hazel eyes that were a perfect mirror of his own. He looked at Harper, whose face held the undeniable, unmistakable echoes of his own mother. The math hit him with the force of a freight train. 3 years. "No," Tristan choked out, stumbling back a step. His hands began to shake violently. "No. Maya, are they?" "Meet Harrison and Harper," Maya said, her voice dropping the polite facade, replacing it with cold, hard steel. "They turn 3 next month." The silence that fell over the garden was absolute. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the pond water against the distant dock. Vanessa looked from the children to Tristan, her eyes wide with mounting horror. "Tristan? What is she talking about? Who are these children?" "They are the legacy he left behind in a Brooklyn apartment when he decided he wanted to play dress-up in your world, Vanessa," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly across the front rows. "He walked out precisely 48 hours before I found out I was pregnant. He didn't leave a forwarding address. He drained the joint savings account, and he made sure the legal paperwork absolved him of any future obligations." Howard Kensington's face had turned a dangerous, mottled purple. He stared at Tristan, the young man he had groomed, the man who had sworn his past was clean and uncomplicated. "Is this true, Cole?" Howard demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Tristan was hyperventilating. He looked at the children, his children, who were currently holding the hands of a billionaire venture capitalist. "Maya, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. If you had told me, if I had told you, what?" Maya cut him off, her voice cracking like a whip. "You would have stayed out of obligation. You would have resented them the way you resented me. You told me I was an anchor, Tristan. You told me my ambitions were a joke. You didn't deserve to know. You didn't deserve them." Lex stepped slightly forward, placing a protective hand on Maya's lower back. He looked at Tristan with a mixture of disgust and absolute pity. "You see, Cole," Lex said smoothly, ensuring his voice reached Howard Kensington's ears, "I have a very strict policy regarding the character of the men I do business with. When Howard approached me about funding Kensington Holdings' European expansion, I was heavily inclined to say yes. Howard is a legend." Lex paused, his eyes flicking to the older man. "But investing in a company that is about to make a man like you a senior partner, a man who abandons his family and hides his own blood for the sake of climbing the social ladder, that is a liability I simply cannot afford." Howard Kensington gasped, as if he had been physically struck. The multi-million-dollar deal the crown jewel of his career's twilight, was evaporating before his eyes because of the fraud standing at the altar. "Mr. Harrington, please!" Howard begged, stepping between Lex and Tristan, completely turning his back on his future son-in-law. "This boy's personal failings are not a reflection of my firm. We can restructure. He doesn't have to be a partner. Hell, he doesn't have to be on the payroll." "Daddy, no!" Vanessa cried, tears finally spilling over her expertly applied mascara, ruining her flawless makeup. She grabbed Tristan's arm, but he pulled away, his eyes entirely fixated on the toddlers who were looking at him with mild boredom. "I think we've seen enough, darling," Lex said, turning his attention entirely back to Maya. He reached down and scooped Harrison up into his arms, while Maya picked up Harper. Maya looked at Tristan one last time. The anger, the residual pain that had haunted her for 3 years, completely vanished, replaced by nothing but profound apathy. He wasn't a monster. He was just a terribly small, weak man. "Have a beautiful wedding, Vanessa," Maya said softly, turning away from the altar. As Maya, Lex, and the twins walked back up the makeshift runway toward the waiting jet, the sound of Howard Kensington furiously screaming at Tristan echoed across the manicured lawns, a fitting soundtrack to the absolute destruction of Tristan Cole's fraudulent empire. The roar of the Gulfstream engines fading into the Hampton sky left behind a silence so absolute, so suffocating, that it felt as though the air had been vacuumed from the Kensington estate. Tristan Cole stood paralyzed on the plush white carpet of the aisle, the scent of crushed orchids suddenly nauseating. 300 pairs of eyes, belonging to the most ruthless, gossip-hungry aristocrats on the eastern seaboard, were boring into him. He could hear the faint, rapid-fire, click, click, click of smartphone cameras capturing the exact moment his life disintegrated. Howard Kensington did not yell. Men worth $3 billion rarely needed to raise their voices to inflict absolute destruction. Instead, he slowly turned his back on Tristan and addressed the shocked congregation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Howard said, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, icy calm, "I apologize for the disruption. It appears there has been a profound misjudgment of character on my part, and on the part of my daughter. Please enjoy the champagne and the catering in the main tent. The ceremony, however, is permanently cancelled." "Daddy, no!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice tearing through the manicured garden. She lunged forward, her diamond tiara sitting askew in her blonde hair. "You can't do this. The New York Times is here. The society pages." Howard grabbed his daughter by the shoulders, his fingers digging into the delicate lace of her Vera Wang gown. "Vanessa, pull yourself together. That man," he pointed a trembling finger at Tristan, "just cost me the European expansion. He lied to my face. He lied to you. And he publicly humiliated this family in front of Alexander Harrington. You will not marry him. You will not speak to him. If you walk down that aisle, I will freeze your trust fund before the sun sets." Vanessa gasped, the threat of poverty instantly short-circuiting her romantic despair. She looked at Tristan, her tear-streaked face twisting from heartbreak into a mask of pure, unadulterated revulsion. "You disgusting, lying parasite. You told me she was a barren, gold-digging barista." "Vanessa, baby, please listen to me," Tristan begged, stepping forward, his hands raised in surrender. "I didn't know about the children. I swear on my life. I was young. I was stupid. I wanted to give you the life you deserved." "Save it, Cole," Howard interrupted, stepping between them like a human shield. He signaled to his private security detail, who immediately began moving toward the altar. "You are officially terminated from Kensington Holdings, effective immediately. Security will escort you to the perimeter of the estate. You are to leave your company car, your company phone, and the keys to the Tribeca loft, which is owned by my firm." Tristan's jaw dropped. "Howard, you can't do this. I'm a junior partner. I have contracts." "Read the morality clause in your employment contract, boy," Howard sneered, leaning in close so only Tristan could hear. "Abandoning a pregnant wife and committing financial fraud by hiding assets during a divorce proceeding? Because I guarantee you, with Alexander Harrington backing her, Maya Hastings is going to tear your previous divorce settlement to shreds. You are a liability. Now get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing." Two burly security guards in dark suits clamped their hands onto Tristan's biceps. "Vanessa!" Tristan screamed, thrashing against their grip as they began to physically drag him down the aisle, away from the altar, away from the billions he had sold his soul to touch. "Vanessa, don't let them do this!" Vanessa didn't even look at him. She was already surrounded by her bridesmaids, frantically ordering them to call her publicist to spin the narrative before Page 6 got hold of the story. Tristan was dragged past the rows of whispering guests. He saw a prominent hedge fund manager actively deleting his contact information from a phone. He saw the senator shaking his head in disgust. He was being excised from their world like a malignant tumor. As they shoved him out of the wrought iron gates of the estate and onto the dusty shoulder of the Hamptons highway, the reality of his situation crashed down on him. He had no job. He had no home. He had no fiancée. And the woman he had thrown away like garbage was currently flying back to a penthouse, raising his beautiful children in the lap of unimaginable luxury, completely untouchable. At 30,000 feet, the matte black G65 cruised smoothly toward the gleaming skyline of Manhattan, slicing through the crisp afternoon air. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was entirely devoid of the chaotic, screaming spectacle that had just consumed the Kensington estate. Maya sat back in a plush, cream-colored leather recliner. She held a crystal tumbler of sparkling water, the ice clinking softly against the glass, and watched the scattered clouds drift by her oval window. The adrenaline that had carried her down the steps of the jet and down the wedding aisle was slowly draining away, leaving behind a profound, surprising lightness in her chest. For 3 long years, a tiny, dark knot of resentment had lived beneath her ribs. It was a lingering whisper of fear that she was, perhaps, the inadequate failure Tristan had so viciously accused her of being when he packed his bags. Seeing him cower at the altar, stripped of his manufactured arrogance and exposed as a pathetic fraud in front of the only people he cared about, had dissolved that knot completely. Lex sat across the aisle from her, his long legs crossed as he softly reviewed a stream of incoming emails on his iPad. On the custom cashmere sofa at the rear of the cabin, Harrison and Harper lay fast asleep, their limbs tangled together, completely exhausted by the sheer excitement of the airplane ride. "You're very quiet," Lex observed, setting the tablet down on the burled walnut table between them. He rested his chin on his hand, his piercing blue eyes studying her with intense, unwavering affection. "Any regrets about the wardrobe choice? Or the entrance?" "Only that I didn't wear a slightly brighter shade of white," Maya replied, a genuine, radiant smile finally breaking across her face. Lex let out a deep, resonant chuckle that warmed the spacious cabin. "You were flawless, and it seems your impact was immediate. Howard Kensington just sent me an incredibly panicked email. He's offering my capital group a 10% better margin on the European merger if I am willing to, in his words, overlook this deeply unfortunate personal incident." Lex paused, his smile sharpening into something dangerous. He also confirmed that Tristan Cole has been officially terminated, stripped of his equity, and physically escorted off the premises by private security. Maya shook her head, tracing the gold rim of her glass. "It's brutal. They eat their own in that world without a second thought." "They do, which is why a man like Tristan was always going to end up as prey. He lacked the spine to actually survive among them," Lex agreed. "But he made his bed. And speaking of the mess he left behind, I've already set the wheels in motion." Lex's tone shifted, becoming entirely professional and fiercely protective. A man who has just lost his fiancée, his career, and his social standing is a desperate man. He might try to sue for custody, or worse, petition for child support claiming he is destitute and you hid his heirs. Maya's grip on her glass tightened until her knuckles turned pale. The maternal instinct flared up, hot and absolute. He will not get anywhere near them. He gave up his rights. And we are going to make sure that stands in a titanium-clad, subterranean vault, Lex assured her, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. Eleanor Sterling is waiting for us at my downtown office. She is, without exaggeration, the most vicious family law attorney on the eastern seaboard. We are going to bury Tristan under so many preemptive injunctions and restraining orders that he won't be able to say the word twins aloud without violating a federal court order. The media fallout began before the jet's landing gear even touched the tarmac at Teterboro Airport. Guests at the Kensington wedding, desperate to be the first to break the scandal, had entirely lacked discretion. By 4 p.m., Page 6 had published a blistering front-page exclusive. Hampton's nuptials hijacked. Billionaire Lex Harrington and CEO fiancé crash high society. Wedding to expose groom's secret twins. The article detailed every agonizing second of the confrontation. It described Maya's stunning Alexander McQueen suit, Lex's lethal dismissal of the groom, Vanessa's public meltdown, and Tristan's subsequent firing. Within hours, social media erupted. Maya Hastings became an overnight legend, a modern icon of feminine retribution and absolute, undeniable success. When Maya walked into the glass-walled offices of Hastings Vanguard on Monday morning, she was greeted by a standing ovation from her staff. Her agency saw a staggering 400% spike in inbound inquiries by noon. The most exclusive luxury brands in the world were suddenly begging for meetings, eager to associate themselves with the woman who had brought the Kensington Empire to its knees without raising her voice. Tristan Cole, on the other hand, was entirely radioactive. His nightmare had begun the moment Howard's security guards dumped him on the dusty shoulder of the Montauk Highway. He had been forced to call a wildly expensive rideshare to get back to Manhattan, only to discover that his keycard to the Tribeca loft had been deactivated. The building concierge had coldly informed him that Kensington Holdings owned the property, and Tristan's personal belongings had been stuffed into heavy-duty garbage bags and left in the service alley. 2 weeks later, Tristan sat in a dingy, aggressively fluorescent-lit attorney's office in a strip mall in Queens. The air smelled of stale coffee and desperation. He had spent the absolute last of his severely depleted savings retaining a third-rate lawyer, begging the man to find a loophole in the original divorce decree. Tristan looked haggard. The bespoke Tom Ford tuxedos were gone, replaced by a wrinkled, off-the-rack button-down. The arrogant, hungry gleam in his hazel eyes was entirely extinguished. "Look, Mr. Cole." His lawyer sighed heavily, tossing a massive, intimidating stack of heavily redacted legal documents onto the cheap laminate desk. "I'm going to be perfectly straight with you, because I charge by the hour and you're out of retainer money. You have absolutely zero case." "None." "They're my biological children," Tristan protested, his voice cracking with a mixture of panic and exhaustion. "She hid them from me for 3 years. She's worth millions now, and Harrington is worth billions. I'm living in a Motel 6 by the airport. I am legally entitled to something. Spousal support, child support, visitation, something." "You are entitled to exactly what you aggressively demanded in the final divorce settlement. Absolutely nothing," the lawyer countered sharply, leaning forward. "I just got off a conference call with Eleanor Sterling. Do you have any idea who she is? She represents tech moguls and minor European royalty. She informed me, in no uncertain terms, that if you even attempt to file a single piece of paperwork regarding custody, they will immediately countersue you for 3 years of back child support." Tristan swallowed hard, the cramped room beginning to spin. "I don't have a job. They can't do that. They can, and they will, calculate it retroactively, based on the exorbitant junior partner salary and bonuses you were pulling in at Kensington Holdings over the last 3 years, the lawyer explained, tapping the stack of papers with a pen. "You would owe them roughly $2 million immediately. Furthermore, They have an ironclad, notarized record of you voluntarily relinquishing all future theoretical parental rights in exchange for keeping your entire 401k and stock portfolio during the divorce proceedings. Tristan winced, as if he had been physically struck. He remembered that day clearly. He had been so desperate to keep his money to buy Vanessa Kensington a flawless, blood diamond engagement ring that he had signed away everything else. Every selfish shortcut he had taken, every ruthless decision he had made to climb to the top of the social ladder had simply been a brick in the wall of his own tomb. Ms. Sterling also requested I pass along a personal message from Ms. Hastings, the lawyer added quietly, his tone softening just a fraction at the sight of the thoroughly broken man sitting across from him. Tristan looked up slowly, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. What? She said to tell you that the children are thriving. Their trust funds are fully endowed. They are loved beyond measure, and they will never, ever know the name of the man who thought they were a burden. Tristan slumped back in his uncomfortable vinyl chair, the sheer finality of the words crushing the very last ounce of fight out of his body. He was a ghost. He had been completely, surgically erased from the beautiful, triumphant life Maya had built from the ashes he had left behind. 1 year later, the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the water against the ancient stone walls of Villa del Balbianello sounded nothing like the chaotic shores of the Hamptons. Here, on the edge of Lake Como, Italy, the air tasted of citrus, ancient cypress trees, and absolute, unadulterated peace. Maya stood on the terraced balcony of the master suite, looking out over the pristine, glacial waters. She did not wear a sharp, architectural power suit today. Instead, she was draped in a custom Oscar de la Renta gown of delicate, cascading silk organza. The bodice was embroidered with thousands of minuscule pearls that shimmered against her rich, dark skin, like stars against a midnight sky. There was no veil to obscure her vision. Her natural curls were pinned back with a simple, antique diamond comb that had belonged to Lex's late grandmother. She traced the edge of the stone balustrade, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past 12 months. Following the explosive confrontation at the Kensington estate, Tristan Cole had been entirely erased from the upper echelons of Manhattan society. Eleanor Sterling, true to her terrifying reputation, had executed a legal masterclass. Confronted with the threat of retroactive child support that would have bankrupted his entire bloodline, Tristan had quietly and permanently signed over all remaining theoretical parental rights. He was legally, financially, and socially excommunicated. Howard Kensington had seen to it that Tristan was blacklisted from every major financial institution on Wall Street. "You look like a Renaissance painting," a low, familiar voice murmured from the doorway. Maya turned. Lex stood there, looking impossibly handsome in a midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo. He wasn't supposed to see her before the ceremony. Tradition dictated otherwise, but Lex Harrington had never cared much for rules that kept him away from the woman he loved. He walked onto the balcony, his eyes scanning every inch of her with a reverence that still managed to take Maya's breath away. He reached out, gently tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "The guests are seated," Lex said softly. "All 50 of them. No press, no society photographers. Just the people who actually matter." "And the twins?" Maya asked, a warm smile spreading across her lips. "Currently attempting to bribe the string quartet into playing Baby Shark. But the nanny has them reasonably contained." Lex laughed. "They are also, officially, legally, and permanently Harringtons. The judge signed the adoption papers this morning, right before we flew over. Eleanor sent the confirmation." Maya let out a shaky breath, a single tear escaping her eye and rolling down her cheek. Lex caught it with his thumb. For 3 years she had carried the terrifying burden of protecting her children from a world that their biological father had deemed them unworthy of. Now, they were enveloped in an impenetrable fortress of love, security, and infinite opportunity. "Thank you," Maya whispered, resting her forehead against his chest. "You never have to thank me for loving my own children, Maya," Lex replied fiercely, kissing the crown of her head. "Now, are you ready to become my wife?" Thousands of miles away, in a damp, aggressively air-conditioned strip mall tax preparation office in Secaucus, New Jersey, Tristan Cole stared blankly at his computer monitor. The fluorescent overhead lights buzzed with a migraine-inducing hum. His desk was cluttered with half-eaten takeout containers and stacks of W-2 forms for local plumbing contractors and retail workers. He wore a cheap, polyester blend shirt that chafed at his collar. The Tom Ford suits had been sold months ago to cover his legal fees and the deposit on a depressing studio apartment overlooking a perpetually congested highway. Vanessa Kensington had married a Belgian pharmaceutical heir 6 months after the Hamptons disaster. She had sent Tristan a restraining order in lieu of an invitation. Tristan mindlessly clicked open a new tab on his browser, navigating to a major news portal to kill the last 10 minutes of his shift. There, dominating the front page of the lifestyle section, was a photograph that made the blood freeze in his veins. The headline read, "A True Modern Fairy Tale. CEO Maya Hastings and billionaire Lex Harrington wed in stunning private Lake Como ceremony." Tristan clicked the link, his hand trembling so violently he nearly dropped his plastic mouse. The article featured a single, officially released photograph. It showed Maya and Lex standing beneath a canopy of wisteria at Villa del Balbianello. Lex was looking at Maya with a devotion so profound it practically radiated through the screen. And Maya looked like a queen. She was radiant, untouchable, and smiling with a genuine joy that Tristan realized he had never once put on her face. But what broke Tristan completely was the bottom of the photo. Standing in front of the bride and groom were Harrison and Harper. They were dressed beautifully, laughing as they threw white rose petals into the air. His children. The children he had abandoned in a drafty Bushwick apartment because he thought they would ruin his life. Tristan stared at the screen until his vision blurred with bitter, agonizing tears. He had wanted the world. He had wanted the billions, the prestige, the effortless power of the elite. And in his desperate, greedy scramble to steal it, he had thrown away the very woman who had gone on to conquer that world and the children who would inherit it. He closed the browser, the fluorescent lights buzzing mockingly overhead as he turned back to a stack of tax returns, entirely alone. Back in Italy, the ceremony was flawless. There were no screeching jets, no dramatic interruptions, and no forced performative vows. Just the quiet rustle of the wind through the cypress trees and the absolute certainty of 2 people who had fought through the fire to find each other. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Lex pulled Maya into a breathtaking kiss, prompting a cheer from the intimate gathering of their closest friends and family. Harrison and Harper immediately broke free from their nanny, sprinting down the aisle and crashing into Lex's legs. Lex laughed, scooping Harrison up with one arm and Harper with the other, turning to Maya. "To us," Lex whispered, over the heads of their children. Maya looked at her brilliant, fiercely loving husband, at the beautiful children who bore no scars of the man who had left them, and out at the glittering expanse of the Italian lake. She had not just survived the betrayal that was meant to destroy her. She had weaponized her pain, built an empire, and demanded the universe give her exactly what she deserved. "To us," Maya agreed, the diamond on her left hand catching the setting sun. The story of Maya Hastings is not merely a tale of revenge, but a testament to the absolute power of silent, relentless resurrection. Tristan Cole's fatal mistake was assuming that Maya's worth was tethered to his presence, failing to recognize the dormant empire she harbored within. When he abandoned his family for the illusion of status, he orchestrated his own poetic destruction. True retribution rarely requires screaming matches or petty sabotage. It is best served through the undeniable, towering architecture of personal success. Maya did not destroy Tristan. She simply allowed the blinding light of her achievements to expose the fraudulent foundation of his life. In the end, wealth and power merely amplified what was already true. Tristan was a man who traded a priceless reality for a cheap illusion, while Maya, forged in the fires of abandonment, claimed the crown she always deserved.